There are targets on the eastern Ukrainian front that Ukrainian commanders mark differently from everything else. Not because they are larger, not because they are more visible, but because destroying one of them changes the operational calculus for an entire Russian front section in ways that no single tank kill, no matter how satisfying, can replicate. The 2S4 tile pan, the Tulip, is one of those targets. Days ago, Ukrainian drone operators tracking Russian rear area activity in eastern Ukraine identified a signature that immediately elevated to priority collection status. The distinctive thermal profile and movement pattern of a 2S4 self-propelled mortar, the largest mortar system in active operational use anywhere in the world, a 240mm weapon that Russian forces have been using to systematically collapse Ukrainian fortified positions that conventional artillery cannot efficiently destroy. Finding one, tracking one, destroying one. That was the mission that Ukrainian reconnaissance teams, FPV operators, and artillery crews built their operation around over the following hours. Hours of patient surveillance, careful positioning, and precise coordination that ended with one of Russia's most capable and most irreplaceable siege weapons burning in a tree line in eastern Ukraine. This is the story of how that happened. And this is what Russia lost. The 2S4 tile pan entered Soviet service in 1975. It was designed for exactly the mission Russian forces have been using it for in Ukraine: the destruction of hardened defensive positions, bunkers, and fortifications that resist standard artillery calibers. The 240mm mortar round it fires is not a standard projectile. It is an engineering demolition tool, a weapon designed to deliver enough explosive energy to collapse reinforced concrete, to breach underground defensive positions, to destroy fortifications that a 152mm artillery round would damage but not reliably destroy. Russia has a limited number of these systems. Estimates based on pre-war inventories and confirmed losses suggest that the total operational fleet of 2S4s available to Russian forces in Ukraine numbers in the dozens, not the hundreds. Everyone destroyed is a reduction of a capability that Russia cannot quickly replace, because the 2S4 has not been in active production for decades, and the reconstitution of production capacity for a weapon system of this type, under current sanctions conditions, is not a realistic near-term option. Ukrainian commanders know this. When a 2S4 is identified, it becomes the priority target for every available collection and strike asset within range. The identification in this case came from a drone operator conducting routine rear area surveillance along a sector of the Eastern Front, where Ukrainian intelligence had assessed Russian forces were preparing for a renewed push against Ukrainian defensive positions. The assessment was based on pattern analysis, increased logistics traffic, ammunition resupply runs that were heavier than normal maintenance requirements, the repositioning of Russian artillery units that typically precedes an offensive preparation sequence. Something was being planned, and something that required the kind of fortification breaching capability that a 2S4 provides was part of that plan. The drone operator who first acquired the thermal signature was experienced enough to know what he was looking at. The 2S4's profile is distinctive: a large tracked vehicle with the mortar tube in the rear mount breech-loading configuration, significantly larger than a standard self-propelled artillery piece, with a specific thermal signature when the mortar tube is warm from recent firing. The vehicle was moving, changing position after what appeared to have been a fire mission, executing the shoot and scoot procedure that Russian crews use to reduce their exposure to Ukrainian counter-battery fires. The shoot and scoot procedure is sound tactics: fire from one position, move before the enemy can locate and engage, establish a new firing position at a different location. Against most Ukrainian counter-battery assets operating on a standard detection-to-engagement timeline, it works. The 2S4 crew that was using it on this day had survived by using it. They had established a pattern: fire, move approximately 2 kilometers, establish fire again, that had kept them alive and operational while they worked to destroy Ukrainian defensive positions. What they did not know was that Ukrainian drone operators had been following them for nearly 4 hours. The surveillance was conducted with discipline that reflects the specific operational culture Ukrainian drone teams have developed. The operators did not attempt to engage the vehicle on the move. Moving target engagement with FPV drones and artillery in terrain, with tree lines and variable cover, is harder, less reliable, and consumes assets without guaranteed results. Ukrainian operators waited. They watched the 2S-4 complete 2 fire missions, relocate twice, and finally move into a tree-lined position that Ukrainian analysis indicated was likely to be used for maintenance and crew rest, a position that Russian crews use when they assess they have achieved sufficient separation from their last firing location to take a brief operational pause. The tree line was the opportunity, a stationary target in a concealed position, but a stationary target with known coordinates, in a location where FPV drones could approach through the concealment of the surrounding vegetation and where artillery could achieve masked fire without exposing the full signature of a direct fire mission. Ukrainian commanders authorized the strike package. 2 FPV drone teams were assigned to the mission, one as primary, one as backup, in case the primary lost the target on approach through the tree line. Artillery was tasked for simultaneous engagement to destroy any crew elements that dispersed from the vehicle when the drone strikes hit. A third drone operating at higher altitude maintained overwatch of the entire engagement area to provide battle damage assessment and to track any secondary vehicles associated with the 2S-4, the ammunition carriers and support vehicles that typically operate in proximity to a system of this type. The approach of the primary FPV team through the tree line was the most technically demanding phase of the operation, flying FPV drones through wooded terrain, tracking a large but partially concealed vehicle from a closing angle while managing the communications link in an electronically contested environment, requires a level of pilot skill and situational awareness that reflects hundreds of hours of operational experience. The primary team flew their approach profile without losing the target. The first drone struck the 2S-4's hull directly, penetrating into the fighting compartment. The second drone, following seconds later on a slightly different approach angle, struck the ammunition storage area at the rear of the vehicle. The secondary explosion from the 240mm ammunition was significant. Large-caliber mortar rounds are not small charges. When the ammunition cooked off, the detonation was large enough to be observed by Ukrainian Overwatch drones from kilometers away. The tree line that had concealed the vehicle was no longer concealing anything. Artillery rounds, already in flight when the drone strikes hit, landed on the dispersal area around the vehicle where crew members who had been outside the 2S-4 were attempting to move away from the secondary explosions. The simultaneous combination of the FPV strikes on the vehicle and the artillery on the surrounding area eliminated the possibility of crew survival or vehicle recovery. The 2S-4 tile pan that had been systematically destroying Ukrainian fortified positions in eastern Ukraine for what Ukrainian intelligence assessed had been weeks of operational activity was gone. The crew that had operated it, specialists who understood the 240mm mortar system, who had been trained specifically in its employment, who had developed the operational procedures and the situational awareness that kept them alive and effective, was gone. The Russian front section that had been relying on that specific weapon system to breach Ukrainian defensive positions before a planned push now had to operate without it. Now let us examine precisely what Russia lost. The 2S-4 tile pan has an estimated replacement value, accounting for the specialized manufacturing requirements of a 240mm mortar system and the current state of Russian defense industrial capacity under sanctions of between $8 million and $12 million USD per unit. This figure reflects not just the vehicle platform but the specialized mortar tube, the fire control systems, and the logistical and maintenance infrastructure that supports the system's operation. Under pre-war conditions, this would already be a significant loss. Under current conditions, with Russia unable to access the precision manufacturing components and specialized materials that new production of a system like this would require, the effective replacement cost is substantially higher, because replacement through new production is effectively not possible on any operationally relevant timeline. The 2S-4 is not being manufactured in Russia today. The production lines that built it were Soviet-era facilities, and the reconstitution of those lines under current sanctions and industrial conditions is a years-long undertaking, not a months-long one. Russia's inventory of operational 2S-4s is finite and shrinking. Every unit destroyed reduces a capability that cannot be regenerated quickly. The Russian front sections that relied on 2S-4 support for their fortification breaching operations must now either request reallocation from a dwindling fleet, accept reduced capability against hardened Ukrainian positions, or attempt to achieve similar effects with standard artillery calibers that are less effective against the reinforced positions Ukrainian engineers have constructed. The ammunition destroyed with the vehicle adds an additional $1.5 to $3 million in material cost. The 240mm rounds that the 2S4 fires are not standard ammunition. They are specialized, expensive, and also not easy to replace under current production constraints. Each round destroyed represents a capability gap that affects not just this vehicle, but the overall supply of specialized ammunition available to Russian forces in Ukraine. The crew loss is arguably the most significant component of the total cost. Operating a 2S4 effectively requires highly specialized training. The system is mechanically complex. Its employment requires understanding of specific ballistic tables and firing procedures that differ substantially from standard artillery operation, and the tactical employment of a weapon of this size in a dynamic combat environment requires experience that takes years to accumulate. The crew that was lost in this engagement had that experience. They had kept their vehicle alive and operational through weeks of combat operations, which itself indicates a level of tactical competence above the average. Replacing them with fresh trainees does not restore the capability. It creates a crew that can operate the vehicle mechanically, but lacks the tactical judgment and operational proficiency of the crew that was lost. Beyond the immediate material and personnel cost, the loss of this specific 2S4 has operational consequences for the Russian unit that was relying on it. Ukrainian defensive positions in the sector where this vehicle was operating remain intact. The fortification breaching fires that Russian commanders had planned as part of their preparation sequence for a renewed push are no longer available. Russian commanders must now choose between proceeding with their offensive preparation using less capable systems, accepting that Ukrainian fortifications will be less degraded when their infantry assault begins, or delaying the operation until alternative assets can be sourced from elsewhere in the theater. Either choice costs Russia time and operational momentum. Time in this conflict is not neutral. Every day of delay is a day that Ukrainian defenders use to improve their positions, rotate their forces, receive additional equipment, and prepare for the assault they know is being planned. The operational consequence of destroying one vehicle is not limited to the vehicle. It extends to everything that vehicle was enabling. Ukrainian drone operators spent 4 hours tracking a target that most surveillance systems would have lost after the first position change. They maintained observation through 2 complete shoot-and-scoot cycles, through terrain transitions and concealment attempts, until the moment the 2S4 crew made the decision to stop and rest that gave Ukrainian forces the opportunity they had been waiting for. 4 hours of patience, 2 FPV drone strikes, 1 secondary explosion large enough to be seen from kilometers away, 1 less Taipan destroying Ukrainian fortifications, 1 more section of the Eastern Front where Ukrainian defensive positions are standing because the weapon designed to collapse them is gone. Ukraine tracks, Ukraine strikes, Ukraine holds the line. To understand the full significance of this engagement, it is necessary to examine the specific role the 2S4 Taipan has been playing in Russian offensive operations along the Eastern Front, and why Ukrainian commanders treat the destruction of a single one of these systems as a priority that justifies extended surveillance operations and the expenditure of multiple drone and artillery assets. The character of the fighting in eastern Ukraine has, over the course of this conflict, evolved substantially from the fluid maneuver operations that characterized earlier phases. The front has stabilized along axes where both sides have invested significant engineering effort in defensive construction. Ukrainian forces have built layered defensive systems, fighting positions, covered trenches, reinforced command posts, hardened ammunition storage, and the interlocking fire arrangements that make a prepared defensive line costly to assault frontally. These positions are not simple. They are engineered. They incorporate reinforced concrete, deep earthworks, and overhead cover designed to defeat standard artillery calibers. This is the environment in which the 2S4 Taipan becomes not just a useful system, but a potentially decisive one. A 240mm mortar round carries a warhead mass and explosive content that is simply in a different category from standard artillery, where a 152mm round landing on a reinforced position may damage the structure, suppress the occupants, and force them to take cover. but leave the basic defensive capability intact. A 240mm round landing on the same position has a reasonable probability of collapsing it entirely. The engineering investment that Ukrainian defenders have made in their positions can be negated by a weapon system that can deliver that level of explosive energy with acceptable accuracy. Russian commanders have understood this. The deployment of two S-4s to the Eastern Front, confirmed through multiple open-source observations since 2022, reflects a deliberate operational decision to use the siege capabilities of these systems against the fortified Ukrainian defensive lines that Russian infantry cannot assault effectively without significant preparatory fires to degrade the defenders' covered positions. The two S-4 that Ukrainian forces tracked and destroyed in this engagement had been doing exactly that work. Ukrainian intelligence assessment, based on the pattern of fire missions observed over the preceding weeks and the correlation of those missions with damage to Ukrainian positions in the sector, indicated that this specific vehicle had been responsible for the destruction or severe damage of multiple Ukrainian defensive works. Its operational contribution to Russian offensive preparation in the sector was real and measurable. Destroying it required more than a single good intelligence observation. It required maintaining that observation through the full shoot-and-scoot cycle that the crew was executing. A cycle designed specifically to prevent the kind of extended surveillance that Ukrainian operators ultimately achieved. The discipline that those operators demonstrated in not engaging during the movement phases, in accepting the risk that the vehicle might escape observation between relocations, in waiting for the moment of maximum vulnerability rather than taking a lower probability shot during movement. That discipline is the product of exactly the kind of operational experience and command culture that separates effective military organizations from merely motivated ones. The question that Ukrainian commanders had to manage during the surveillance period was not simply where the 2S-4 was going next. It was whether the surveillance asset, the drone maintaining observation, would itself be detected, and whether Russian countermeasures would be activated against it before the strike could be executed. Russian forces operating in eastern Ukraine have air defense assets that specifically target Ukrainian surveillance drones. Electronic warfare systems attempt to jam drone control links and disrupt video transmission. The operators maintaining observation of the 2S-4 were managing their drone's flight profile, altitude, and electronic signature to minimize the probability of detection, while maintaining the continuous observation that the targeting operation required. This is an aspect of Ukrainian drone operations that receives less attention than the dramatic FPV strike footage that circulates widely but represents a critical enabling capability: the sustained reconnaissance operation. The patient, disciplined, technically demanding work of keeping eyes on a high-value target through multiple position changes over multiple hours is what makes the precision strike possible. Without the 4 hours of surveillance that preceded the strike, the 2S-4 would have disappeared into the rear area and continued its work against Ukrainian fortifications. The operators who maintained that surveillance, who managed their platform against Russian countermeasures, who kept the picture alive long enough for the strike package to be assembled and authorized, they are as responsible for the outcome as the FPV pilots who flew the final attack. The broader operational context of this engagement also warrants examination. The Russian unit that was planning to use the 2S-4's fortification breaching capability as part of an offensive preparation sequence in eastern Ukraine is now facing a planning problem. The fires plan that was built around the assumption of 2S-4 support must be revised. The specific Ukrainian positions that were designated for 2S-4 engagement, the hardened command posts, the reinforced fighting positions, the covered ammunition points that standard artillery could not reliably destroy, are still standing. Russian infantry assault timelines, if Russian commanders proceed without an alternative heavy mortar capability, will be assaulting those positions without the level of preparation that the original plan assumed. This creates a compounding problem for Russian operational planning. Assaulting inadequately prepared positions costs more infantry casualties than assaulting fully prepared positions. Higher infantry casualties in the assault phase reduce the combat power available for exploitation, for holding gained ground, and for responding to Ukrainian counterattacks. A planning failure in the preparation phase propagates through every subsequent phase of the operation. The destruction of one vehicle, the 2S-4 that was supposed to provide the preparation capability, cascades into operational consequences that affect the entire offensive sequence. Ukrainian commanders understand this logic. They have spent years developing the targeting priorities and the intelligence collection capabilities that allow them to identify high-value enabling systems. Systems whose destruction degrades Russian operational capability beyond their immediate replacement cost. The 2S4 Tilepan is the most obvious example, a system whose operational contribution is so disproportionate to its physical size that destroying one is worth the extended surveillance and the strike asset expenditure that the operation required. The 4 Ukrainian FPV operators and the artillery crews and the drone surveillance teams who conducted this operation did not know with certainty that they were about to prevent a Russian assault on Ukrainian positions. They knew they had identified a high-value target. They knew their job was to destroy it. They executed that job with the patience, the precision, and the coordinated professionalism that Ukrainian combined arms operations have consistently demonstrated across this front. The 2S4 Tilepan that was hunting Ukrainian fortifications is gone. The fortifications are still there, and the Ukrainian soldiers inside them, who may never know specifically what was destroyed on their behalf on a cold April morning in a tree line several kilometers behind the Russian forward line, are still in their positions, still holding their ground, still waiting for the assault that Russian commanders are now planning around a capability gap that did not exist yesterday. Ukraine hunts what threatens it most. Ukraine finds it. Ukraine destroys it. And the line holds. There is one final dimension of this engagement that deserves specific attention: the psychological dimension, which military analysis often overlooks in favor of the material accounting, but which has real operational consequences. Russian artillery crews and mortar crews operating in eastern Ukraine are aware that Ukrainian forces have developed the capability to track and destroy them even when they are executing the shoot-and-scoot procedures that are supposed to protect them. The confirmed destruction of 2S4s, of self-propelled artillery pieces, of radar systems and command vehicles, documented through drone footage and battlefield reporting, has reached the Russian personnel who operate these systems. They know that Ukrainian drone operators are looking for them. They know that operating a high-value system in eastern Ukraine means operating a target. This knowledge changes behavior. Crews spend more time in concealment. They reduce the frequency of their fire missions to reduce their observable signature. They move more frequently, burning fuel and wearing out equipment in the process. They delay fire missions, waiting for conditions they assess as lower risk: nighttime, overcast weather, electronic countermeasure coverage, rather than firing when tactically optimal. Every one of these behavioral adaptations reduces operational effectiveness. A 2S4 crew that fires fewer missions because they are concerned about being tracked is providing less support to Russian offensive operations than a crew that fires at full operational tempo. The psychological pressure created by Ukrainian precision strike capability, the knowledge that patience and good intelligence can find and destroy almost any Russian system, regardless of how carefully it is concealed and how diligently shoot-and-scoot procedures are followed, is a force multiplier for Ukrainian defensive operations that extends far beyond the physical destruction of individual systems. It changes the risk calculus of every Russian crew operating a high-value system. It introduces hesitation where there should be aggression. It adds concealment time and movement frequency that degrades the operational availability of systems that Russia needs at maximum effectiveness. The crew of the 2S4 that was destroyed in this engagement had been executing their shoot-and-scoot procedure carefully. They had survived weeks of Ukrainian counter-battery operations. They were good at what they did, and they stopped for maintenance, for rest, for the brief operational pause that any crew operating a demanding system in combat conditions eventually needs, in a tree line that Ukrainian operators had been watching. That pause was enough. 4 hours of Ukrainian surveillance, 2 FPV drone strikes, 1 enormous secondary explosion, 1 Tilepan that will never fire another 240mm round at a Ukrainian defensive position. Ukraine hunts, Ukraine finds, Ukraine destroys, and the line holds.